You thought you were his person. You really did. And then she showed up. And suddenly, everything you thought was solid just crumbled. And now you're sitting there trying to figure out what happened, what went wrong, what she has that you don't. And the worst part? Nobody's talking about what actually happens inside an avoidant's head when he makes that choice. Until right now. Because what I'm about to share with you is going to completely change the way you see this situation. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So stay with me. Because the truth is not what you think it is. And honestly, once you hear these 5 things, you might actually feel relieved. Not because the pain goes away, but because you finally understand what was really happening. And understanding, that's where your power comes back. Before we get into this, if this is the kind of content that helps you see yourself and your relationships more clearly, drop the word clarity in the comments right now. And subscribe, because we go deep on this stuff every single week. You're going to want to be here for what's coming. Now let's talk about the avoidant. Let's really talk about him. Because I think most of us have been given a very surface level explanation of what avoidant attachment actually is. We hear things like, oh, he's just scared of commitment, or he just needs space, or he doesn't know what he wants. And yes, technically, some of that is true, but it's so incomplete that it almost does more damage than good. Because when you only have half the picture, you fill in the rest with yourself. You make it about you. You make it mean something about your worth, your desirability, your lovability. And that is where the real pain lives. So let's build the full picture. Let's start from the beginning and work through all 5 things that an avoidant does when he chooses another woman over you. And I promise you, by the end of this, the story you've been telling yourself is going to look very different. Number 1, he doesn't choose her because she's better. He chooses her because she's newer. This is the one that most people completely miss. And it's the one that, if you truly internalize it, is going to take such a weight off your shoulders. The avoidant is not sitting there comparing the two of you like some kind of romantic spreadsheet. He's not looking at your qualities versus hers and deciding that she edges you out in column 3. That is not what's happening. What's actually happening is something much more primal and much less personal. Here's how the avoidance psychology works. They are wired, usually from early childhood experiences, to associate closeness with danger. Not consciously. They're not walking around thinking intimacy is threatening. But somewhere deep in their nervous system, that is the programming that's running. And so what happens is, the closer you get to them, the more activated that threat response becomes. The more real you are, the more they start to pull away. And by the time they choose to redirect their attention to someone else, what they're really doing is running from the depth that existed with you. She's not better, she's just at the beginning. She's still in the phase where everything is exciting and nothing is real yet. She's still in the part where he can feel the rush without feeling the vulnerability. And the avoidant is incredibly attracted to that phase, because in that phase, he doesn't have to be fully known. He doesn't have to be accountable. He doesn't have to show up in the ways that start to feel suffocating to him when things get real. Think about that for a second. The depth that formed between you and him, the history, the inside jokes, the conversations at 2 a.m, the knowing each other's patterns, all of that, the thing you thought was your greatest asset, is actually what triggered his retreat. You became real. You became a person with needs and expectations and feelings. And the avoidant at this stage of his development cannot handle that. Not because you did anything wrong, but because he doesn't have the internal resources to be a partner in that way yet. So when you see him with her, I need you to really hear this. You are not watching a man choose someone better than you. You are watching a man choose comfort over growth. You are watching a man choose the beginning of something because he can't stay when things get real. And that is entirely about his limitations, not yours. The new woman is not winning. She's just next. And the same pattern will eventually play out with her, because the avoidant doesn't leave because the relationship got bad. He leaves because the relationship got real. And real means vulnerability. And vulnerability to the unhealed avoidant feels like the beginning of pain. Number 2, he rewrites the story of you. This is something that happens almost automatically in the avoidant's mind when he's pulling away and moving towards someone else. He starts to reframe the narrative. He starts to remember the relationship differently. And this is one of the most disorienting things that can happen to you, because you're standing there with one set of memories, and he seems to be living in a completely different version of events. You remember the connection, you remember the good times, you remember all the moments that felt like something real and beautiful was being built. And he's talking about how things were always difficult, or how there was always something missing, or how he just never felt like it was quite right. And you're thinking, are we even talking about the same relationship? Here's why this happens. The avoidance nervous system, when under threat of emotional exposure, has a really well-developed mechanism for devaluation. It's not malicious in most cases. It's actually a self-protective strategy. If he can convince himself that what you had wasn't that special, that there were all these problems, that it wasn't really working anyway, then leaving becomes easier. Then choosing someone else feels more justified. Then he doesn't have to sit with the grief and the guilt of what he's actually walking away from. But here's the cruel irony of this. The things he starts to cite as problems, very often, they're actually just symptoms of intimacy. He says you were too emotional. What he actually means is that you had feelings and expressed them, and that scared him. He says you wanted too much. What he actually means is that your needs activated his fear of engulfment. He says you two just weren't compatible. What he actually means is that the closer things got, the more his system wanted to run. And so the version of the relationship that he's now walking around with is a distorted one. It's been edited by his own fear. And when you hear him describe it that way, it can make you question your own memory. It can make you wonder if you imagined the good things. It can make you doubt whether any of it was real. It was real. Your memory is accurate. The connection existed. The love was genuine. But the avoidant cannot afford to hold on to that version of events right now, because holding on to it would mean acknowledging what he's losing. And acknowledging what he's losing would require him to feel things he is fundamentally terrified to feel. So he edits the story. He makes the relationship smaller in his mind so that the loss feels smaller. And he moves toward the new woman carrying a revised version of what you were together. Not because the truth isn't there, but because looking at the truth would cost him too much. And I want you to hear this clearly. Your job is not to correct his version. Your job is not to fight to have your reality acknowledged by someone whose survival mechanism depends on denying it. Your job is to hold on to your own truth, to trust what you experienced, to not let his rewriting of the story rewrite your sense of self. Number 3. He uses her as emotional anesthesia. This might be the hardest one to hear, but it might also be the most important, because once you understand this, you stop reading his behavior as a love story and you start reading it for what it actually is, which is avoidance in its most classic form. When an avoidant pulls away and moves towards someone new, especially if it happens quickly, what looks like him falling for her is very often him running from himself, running from the feelings that were starting to surface in your relationship, running from the grief of what he might be losing, running from the discomfort of having to actually sit with his emotions and do something constructive with them. A new person is incredibly effective emotional anesthesia. She's exciting and distracting and full of novelty. She doesn't know his patterns yet. She doesn't see his triggers. She hasn't encountered the parts of him he's most ashamed of. And being with her feels like relief, like breathing, like getting out of a room that was getting too hot. But here's what he doesn't realize, or maybe on some level refuses to realize. He hasn't solved anything. He hasn't healed anything. He hasn't grown at all. He's just moved the discomfort to a different location. The same wound that was activated in his relationship with you is sitting right there underneath the surface, and it will be activated again with her. It's just a matter of time and depth. The new relationship feels good right now because it's not deep yet, because depth is where the avoidance unresolved stuff lives. Depth is where the fear kicks in. Depth is where the pattern repeats. And so this whole thing that you're watching, him seemingly happy and present and engaged with her, it is not evidence that she's the answer. It is evidence that he's found a new way to not deal with himself. Please stop for a second. I asked you at the start of the video to leave a comment. If you already did, thank you. If not, take 2 seconds and do it now. It really helps this video reach more people. I want you to think about something. Would you actually want someone to be with you as a form of emotional escape? Would you want to be chosen not because of who you are, but because being with you temporarily numbs someone from their own pain? Of course not, because that's not love. That's using someone as a coping mechanism. And you deserve so much more than to be someone's way of avoiding themselves. What he's doing with her is what someone does when they haven't learned to sit with discomfort, when they haven't developed the emotional tools to process pain, to grow through it, to come out the other side more capable of love. He's doing what feels easier in the moment. And that is deeply, deeply human. But it's also deeply unfair to everyone involved, including her, because eventually the anesthesia wears off. Eventually, depth happens. Eventually, she becomes real too. And then what? The pattern starts again. That's the avoidant cycle. Not because he's a bad person, but because until the wound is healed, the pattern keeps repeating. Number 4, he mistakes her distance for safety and your love for pressure. This is so important. I need you to really slow down and absorb this one, because it directly speaks to something you've probably been beating yourself up about. Whether you were too much, whether you pushed too hard, whether you needed too much. Here's the truth about the avoidance perception. His nervous system is calibrated to read closeness as threat. And what that means in practice is that the things you did that were actually expressions of love, showing up consistently, communicating your feelings, expressing your needs, wanting to talk about where things were going, all of those things, the normal, healthy things that real love requires, were being processed by his system as pressure, as engulfment, as danger. And at the same time, the new woman at this early stage is doing none of those things. Not because she's playing games necessarily, though sometimes that's a factor, but simply because she's at the beginning. She doesn't need things yet. She hasn't made requests yet. She doesn't have expectations yet. And so being with her feels easy, feels free, feels safe. But what he's calling safe is actually just emotional distance. What he's calling easy is actually just the absence of genuine intimacy. He's confusing the feeling of not being triggered with the feeling of being compatible. And those are two completely different things. Think about it this way. If someone is terrified of heights and you put them at ground level, they feel calm, they feel fine, they feel comfortable. But that doesn't mean they've dealt with their fear. It just means they're not being confronted with it right now. The avoidant is the person who's afraid of heights, and the new woman is the ground level. And you're the moment where the elevator started to go up. And his reaction to that had everything to do with his fear and nothing to do with your value. The love you offered was real. The consistency you brought was a gift. The fact that you wanted depth and honesty and real partnership, that's not a flaw. That's a feature. That's what actual love requires. And the fact that he couldn't receive it, that he processed it as pressure rather than as care, that tells you everything about where he is in his journey and nothing about whether you were enough. His inability to receive your love is not proof that your love was wrong. It's proof that he didn't yet have the capacity to hold it. And I want to say something about the woman he chose. She's not winning some competition. She's standing in a place where the light hasn't hit yet, where the depth hasn't come yet, where the real work of love hasn't been asked of him yet. And when it is, because it always is, his system will start doing the same thing it did with you. Because it's not about the woman. It never was. It's about the wound. Number 5. He chose her, but he doesn't stop thinking about you. This is the one that nobody wants to believe when they're in pain, because it sounds like something people say just to make you feel better. But this is actually rooted in what we know about avoidant psychology, and it's important that you understand it. The avoidant has a very specific relationship with longing. When someone is present, available, close, their nervous system tends to respond with distance, with pulling away, with finding reasons why it's not quite right. But when that person is gone, when they've moved on, or when the avoidant has physically or emotionally removed himself, something interesting happens. The longing kicks in. The avoidant often thinks most about the people he's walked away from, not the people he's currently with. There is a kind of romantic nostalgia that the avoidant develops for relationships that are safely in the past. Safely meaning they don't require anything of him right now. They don't threaten him right now. They're just a feeling, a memory, a warmth without risk. And so while he is with her, busy using her as anesthesia, busy running from depth, busy rewriting the story of you so he can justify his choices, some part of him is also doing something else. Some part of him is sitting quietly with the echo of what was real, with the memory of the moments that actually meant something, with the awareness, even if he won't fully let himself feel it, that what he had with you was not nothing. Now, I want to be very careful here, because this is not me telling you to wait for him. This is not me saying that because he thinks about you, you should be available for when he decides to circle back. That is not the message. The message is something far more empowering than that. The message is this: the thing inside you that's asking, was I even real to him? Did any of it matter? Was I actually seen? The answer is yes. You were real to him. It did matter. You were seen. Even if he couldn't show up in the ways that love requires. Even if his fear was louder than his feelings. Even if he moved towards someone else and is now performing happiness while parts of him quietly grieve what he walked away from. You were not invisible. You were not replaceable. You were not nothing. You were someone he was too afraid to fully receive. And that is a profound difference from being someone he simply didn't care about. But here's where I need you to really land. Your worth is not determined by whether he realizes what he lost. Your healing is not contingent on him coming back. Your future is not on hold while he figures out his stuff with someone else. Because here's the thing about the avoidant pattern that most people don't talk about. The people who tend to attract avoidance are often incredibly loving, deeply feeling, highly intuitive people who are capable of enormous amounts of connection and care. And sometimes, because they're so good at seeing the potential in people, they stay too long in spaces that aren't ready for them. You were not wrong to love him. You were not wrong to want depth and realness and a partner who could show up. You were not wrong to have needs and express them and hope that they would be met. All of that was right. All of that was healthy. All of that was the foundation of what real love looks like. What wasn't right was the match. Not because you were incompatible in some surface level way, but because you were ready for something he hasn't yet built the capacity for. And you cannot love someone into that capacity. You cannot wait someone into it. You cannot be patient enough or understanding enough or accommodating enough to shortcut the internal work that only he can do for himself. So what do you do with all of this? You take back the story. You stop reading his choice as a verdict on your worth. You stop watching what he does with her and trying to decode what it means about you. You stop waiting for him to wake up and realize what he had. And you start, gently but deliberately, turning your attention back to yourself. Not in a bitter way, not in a I'll show him way, not in a performance of moving on, but in a genuine, quiet, this is my life and I'm going to live it way. Because the most powerful thing you can do right now is not to figure out how to get him back. The most powerful thing you can do is to become someone who wouldn't wait for someone who chose to leave. That's not coldness. That's not hardness. That's not giving up on love. That's the highest form of self-respect. That's the foundation from which real love, reciprocal love, love that doesn't require you to shrink or chase or prove yourself, that's where that kind of love grows from. Because here's what I know about you. The fact that you loved deeply, the fact that you showed up, the fact that you wanted something real, all of that is a gift. And it belongs in a relationship where it's received, where it's welcomed, where it's met with equal depth and equal willingness to stay when things get real. The avoidant chose someone else, and that hurt. And it's okay for it to hurt. Grief is not weakness. Missing someone who was real to you is not weakness. But staying stuck in the story of why she was chosen over you, that's where the real cost is. Because that story keeps you small. That story keeps you focused on him and his limitations instead of on you and your possibilities. The 5 things that happened when he made that choice, they were all about him. His fear, his pattern, his unresolved wounds, his need for emotional anesthesia, his incapacity for the depth that you were offering. None of it was a referendum on your lovability. None of it was evidence that you are too much. None of it was the universe telling you that you don't deserve what you want. It was just one person at one stage of his life making a fear-based choice. And you get to decide how much of your life that choice defines. Choose yourself now, not because he didn't, but because you deserve someone who does. Choose to grieve without losing yourself. Choose to understand without excusing. Choose to learn from this without becoming someone who loved less or needed less or showed up less fully in the next chapter. The right person for you will not be activated by your depth. They will be drawn to it. They will not process your love as pressure. They will receive it as the gift it actually is. They will not rewrite the story of you to make leaving easier, because they won't want to leave. That's what's available to you on the other side of this. That's what you're actually moving toward. Not him, not this version of love that required you to be less of yourself, but something that has space for all of you. So take a breath, take your story back, and know this with everything you have. You were never the problem. You were always the person who deserved better. And better is still out there. It's just not where you've been looking.